Let me tell you one of the most fascinating stories of one of America's earliest, in fact, America's first missionary to go overseas. His name was Adoniram Judson. Judson was a brilliant, brilliant young man. In fact, before he had reached his teens, if my memory serves me right, he was teaching the adult Sunday school class the book of Revelation from the original language. He was just a genius. So all eyes were on him. But he had a roommate, a fellow by the name of Jacob Ames. And Jacob Ames and he, for some reason, decided to become antagonistic towards things Christian, and they exchanged ideas with those who were trying to defend the faith and sent terror through the campus of those who were pro-biblical teaching, while Ames and Judson were trying to undercut all of that. The day came where they graduated, and as I said, everybody looking towards Judson, wondering what he would do with his brilliant mind. He was going to go into the world of theater. Rode to New York City from his home in Malden, Massachusetts. Interviewed for theater, and he was riding back. As he was riding back, fatigued by this long journey, he decided to stop at an inn. But the innkeeper said there was no room there. He would have to ride on for a little longer. He said, "Sir, why don't you give me the front hall? I'll pay you the price of a room. I'm so tired." The manager said, "I can't do that." He said, "But I tell you what, Mr. Judson, I can do for you. There is a room, but adjacent to that room is a man very critically ill. He's dying of a disease where he's crying in fits of profanity and a stench is coming out of his body. I don't even know if you can withstand it." He said, "Sir, give me that next room. Nobody's going to keep me awake." And he tried to get to sleep but couldn't, listening to this man in fits of raving, profanity, crying out. Judson tried to cover his ears and so on to block it out, didn't succeed, till the noise itself subsided and Judson went to sleep. Later on in the morning, he was paying his bill. And he says, "What happened?" He began to get quiet in the early hours of the morning. "Did he feel better?" The manager says, "No, sir, the man died on our hands." Adoniram Judson looked at the man and said, "What do you do? A stranger comes into your inn, you don't know who he is, and you're suddenly faced with this situation. Well, how do you proceed?" He said, "Mr. Judson, it poses a problem, but let me tell you something. What I cannot put together is the background of this man and the manner of death he died. He obviously was a brilliant young man, Mr. Judson. You went to, and Judson himself had gone to Rhode Island College in Providence, and he says this man dying next door was a honors graduate of Rhode Island College in Providence. His name was Jacob Ames." Suddenly Judson said, "What did you say his name was?" He said, "His name was Jacob Ames, a graduate of Rhode Island College in Providence, today Brown University." Judson did not realize for a moment or two how hard that blow was going to be when he recognized the man who died next door to him had been his roommate at college for all those years, crying out in agony now in the closing moments of his life. Judson says this in his biography, "I got onto the horse and tried to ride back to my home, but I couldn't, because as the hooves of the horse were pounding into the ground, there were two words pounding into my heart: death, hell, death, hell, death, hell." Judson dismounted and began his own journey in his serious commitment to Christ. He went to India as a missionary. He was kicked out of India, went to Burma. He lost his wife to a disease she contracted there. Out of sheer loneliness, he remarried, lost his second wife too, lost some of his children and most of his missionary colleagues. Desperately wanting to do the translation work of the Bible into Burmese before he passed away, he married for the third time. And now, as the Burmese authorities incarcerated him, he was in prison. And he tells the story of the moving moment where his wife, who had given birth to their child while he was in prison, clutching this infant in one arm, crawled on hands and knees to get to his cell so that Judson, through the bars, could put his hand out and stroke the face of his own little one. The Burmese authorities realized that he was not going to live for too much longer. All the while completing, of course, his translation of the Bible into Burmese, while his wife completed the translation of the Bible into Thai. Finally, they put him into a boat to send him back to the United States. He never made it back, died en route. Outside of his home in Malden, Massachusetts, these words are etched in stone. Reverend Adoniram Judson, born August 19, 1788, died April 12, 1850. Malden, his birthplace, the ocean, his sepulcher, converted Burmans in the Burmese Bible, his monument, his record is on high. By the way, Don Richardson, in his book, Eternity in Their Hearts, picks up a little bit on this when he talks about a Burmese folklore, how they have only found out in recent times that the truth of God was going to come someday in a book brought to us by a white man from somewhere. Marvelous story of how brilliantly God shaped the life of this man and took the gospel message into Burma so that the Indian people and the Burmese people had the word. And today when the Burmese cracks open the Bible, he sees the legacy of Judson's work. When the Thai people opened their Bible, it was Adoniram Judson's wife who translated it. It all began, listen, when he looked beyond the immorality into the spiritual root for that problem rather than the other way around. There was a noted criminal by the name of Charlie Peace in England who was being taken to the gallows, and a minister was reading the word of God to him. And as the man turned around, Charlie Peace looked at the minister and said, "What are you reading about?" He said, "I'm reading about hell." And Charlie Peace said, "Minister, do you really believe that?" He said, "Reverend, do you really believe that?" He said, "Let me tell you something. If I believed even half of what you claim to believe about this, I would crawl across England on my hands and knees and count it worth my while, even if it were to be littered with glass pieces, to save one soul from that destiny that you so glibly talk about." Think of that for a sermon to a minister reading to a man heading to the gallows. If I believed even half of what you believe about these things, I would crawl across England on my hands and knees, even if it were to be littered with glass pieces, and count it worth my while to save one soul from that hell that you so glibly talk about. If you and I believe in the spiritual lostness of mankind, then the pressure that Jonah felt and struggled with is the pressure we feel and struggle with. But we must recognize it is a spiritual lostness, not merely a moral depravity.